welcome to the deep dive.
Hey there!
So, you give us your source material this time. It's a pretty wide-ranging YouTube discussion.
Yeah, quite a mix.
And our job, as always, is to pull out the most valuable stuff, the key insights for you.
Think of it as the highlights reel, but, with more substance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your express lane to getting up to speed, maybe with a few surprising bits thrown in.
And today's deep dive, it takes us into a conversation that honestly covers a lot of ground. We're going to explore the main arguments, the different perspectives, moving from things like Bitcoin and the state of capitalism to some, frankly, quite big societal questions.
Absolutely. I mean, this YouTube chat you shared, it really jumps around. We're talking the Sydney housing market, which sounds brutal.
Oh, yeah.
The crazy cost of daycare. Then switching to gun control in the U.S. versus Australia.
Big difference there.
Huge. And then, the whole problem of figuring out what's true anymore online.
That's a constant battle, isn't it?
It really is. Plus, critiques of capitalism, the value of time, which is a big one, smartphones, AI.
And then they throw in the Millennium Prize problems in math.
Right. Just casually.
Yeah.
So, it's quite the journey. We're here to help you make sense of the key points from the speakers. Ready to unpack this?
Let's do it. Let's maybe start with those real-world frustrations they talked about.
Okay.
That story about the Sydney housing market, it really hits home, doesn't it?
Yeah, it sounds intense.
The speaker mentioning daycare costs basically eating up a whole day's salary after tax.
Wow.
It just paints this picture of people, families, just constantly, paying the bills, trying to keep their heads above water.
That feeling of just treading water is something a lot of people probably feel.
Definitely. And it wasn't just big picture stuff either. There was that little moment, that worry about maybe your card getting declined.
Yeah, that relatable fear.
It brings that financial insecurity right down to a personal level. And it leads into this broader feeling, especially maybe for younger generations, that this financial system, well, you're just in it. No escape.
Trapped almost.
Yeah. And from there, they sort of zoomed out to look at bigger societal things, like gun control.
Right, the contrast between Australia after Port Arthur and the U.S.
Exactly. How different cultures handle these really fundamental issues. That comment about guns being part of America's DNA.
It's provocative.
Very. But it makes the point about how deep these things run, how they become part of a national identity almost.
It does. And they mentioned, didn't they, that in places like Australia or the U.K., maybe politics hasn't felt quite so immediate or threatening until more recently.
Yeah, like things felt generally more stable maybe, so people engaged differently. It's just a different starting point.
Which leads into that Maggie A. Hatt anecdote.
Oh, right. That was quite a story.
A personal lesson, the speaker said, about how quickly people judge.
And maybe how little critical thinking goes into those snap judgments sometimes. Just reacting. Delegating thought, as they put it.
Delegating thought. That's a good way to put it. It connects to their point about needing more critical thinking generally.
And then they talked about compulsory voting in Australia, which is so different from the U.S.
Totally different. And the sausage sizzle.
Yeah, the sausage sizzle at the polling stations. A very Aussie tradition.
Yeah, I wonder, does forcing people to vote actually make them think more deeply about it? Or just show up for the sausage?
That's the question, isn't it? One speaker did joke it might be the main motivator for some.
I bet.
But it does show a fundamentally different way of trying to get citizens involved.
But even with voting, there's that frustration with the choices, right? The analogy they used.
Ah, the island analogy, yeah.
Stranded on an island, needing a boat, and someone offers you a log.
Yeah, it really captures that feeling of, seriously, these are my options. Just deep dissatisfaction.
And maybe that dissatisfaction is what pushes people to look for alternatives. Which brings us to Bitcoin.
Exactly. That's where the conversation pivots. They introduce this really compelling idea that in a world overflowing with information, often, dodgy information.
Yeah, full of noise.
Truth itself becomes the most valuable thing. Finding something verifiably true.
Okay, so truth is the premium asset. And their argument is that Bitcoin, it helps preserve that truth.
That's the claim. That Bitcoin, because of its technology, is kind of uniquely able to digitally preserve truth. It's a bold statement.
How does it do that, according to them? What's the mechanism?
Well, it comes down to the blockchain, right? That public ledger. Every transaction is verified by the network and then added to this chain.
And it can't be changed afterward.
Exactly. It's immutable. Set in digital stone, like you said. That's the core of the argument. In a digital world where things can be easily faked or deleted, this offers a permanent record.
Okay, that makes sense. Then they brought up that chart.
Yeah.
Like the one showing people are super worried about inflation.
Right. Inflation is the top concern.
But crypto, Bitcoin, is way down the list of things they see as important or maybe as a solution.
Yeah, it's ironic, isn't it?
It seems like a disconnect. What do they make of that?
Their take was basically education gap, a big one. They're saying people are worried about the exact problem, inflation, their money losing value, but they haven't necessarily connected the dots to see how Bitcoin, with its limited supply, might be part of the solution.
So people don't understand its potential as, like, a hedge?
Pretty much. They haven't grasped the fundamentals compared to, regular money printing, so they're overlooking a potential tool.
Got it. And they really stressed Bitcoin's nature as something disruptive, permanent.
Yeah, they use that analogy of the sun.
Right, the sun.
Something fundamental, always there, can't just be switched off easily. Very different from fleeting political promises or economic policies.
And thinking about politics.
Yeah.
They weren't too complimentary, were they?
No. The feeling was that a lot of current politics is just theater.
Theater, yeah.
And this underlying sense that everyone's a scammer in some way, trying to get votes or attention or money, just something.
Yeah.
A real lack of trust in the established systems.
It sounds pretty cynical. But they also mentioned political honesty. Like, people might prefer upfront BS.
Yeah, that was a weirdly interesting point. Almost like if you know someone's feeding you a line, at least it's honest dishonesty. It's a strange thought.
It really is. And they linked a lot of this cynicism and apathy back to just information overload.
Definitely. The constant barrage from everywhere. News, social media, ads. It's just too much conflicting stuff.
And just tune out eventually.
Right. You get overwhelmed, maybe apathetic. It's something most of us probably feel. And then they said things like the pandemic.
Oh, yeah.
Acted like a circuit breaker. It sort of forced everyone off their normal path.
Made people stop and think.
Exactly. A break from the routine, a chance to reevaluate things, maybe think a bit more critically about how things are run.
That's a really good point. Sometimes you need that jolt. Okay, so then the conversation shifted more towards capitalism itself.
Yeah, a critique of how it often works in practice.
The argument being that the main goal, making money, kind of overshadows creating actual value.
That was the core idea.
Yeah.
That if the only scoreboard is profit, you might end up with, well, lower quality stuff. They use that RFK Jr. example about the food industry.
Right, criticizing big food companies for prioritizing profit over, say, nutrition.
Precisely. That the drive for financial gain can lead to cutting corners, maybe sacrificing quality or long-term value for the consumer. They even floated the idea that proper capitalism focusing on real value creation might be getting stifled by other agendas. Social engineering, they called it.
Interesting. And how do they define value then, if it's not just money?
They said it's a bit subjective, in the eye of the beholder, but generally it's something that actually adds to your life, improves things in some way. And this tied into mentioning an Eastern perspective. That kind of questions just chasing money endlessly without a clear purpose behind it. Is accumulating wealth for its own sake truly fulfilling?
That's a deep question, which leads nicely into their idea of having a definition of enough.
Exactly. Knowing when to say, okay, this is enough. Getting off the hamster wheel of just constantly needing more.
Stepping back and finding purpose beyond just accumulation.
And that connects directly to their next big point, the scarcity of time.
Oh, yes. Time being more valuable than gold.
Much more valuable. Because you can't buy more of it. They use the Steve Jobs example of all the money in the world couldn't buy him more time.
That really puts it in perspective. It's the ultimate finite resource.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And one of the speakers shared that personal story about the happiest time being a year off work.
Just having time.
Just having time for yourself, for thinking, for pursuing other things. It really highlights how crucial time is for well-being, beyond just earning money.
They broke down financial freedom into levels too, right?
Yeah, like different stages, with the top level being able to travel freely without worrying about cost.
And after that?
After that, they suggested more money doesn't really change your life fundamentally. It just becomes lumpy. Like just numbers on a spreadsheet.
So the real status symbol isn't just money anymore.
It's becoming the time billionaire. Someone who controls their own calendar, their own time. That's the new aspiration, they argued.
Controlling your time. That feels like true luxury. They also talked about how tech makes time feel faster.
Yeah, like the sheer volume of information coming at us constantly compresses our perception of time. Everything feels sped up.
I can see that. And they connected this constant data stream to mental health.
They did, specifically anxiety. The idea was that our brains, designed for processing real-world input, get overloaded by this digital flood, and when there's no new input, the brain might default to replaying old stuff, old memories, sometimes anxiously.
Like the brain is trying to find something to process.
Kind of, and that smartphone analogy.
The alien parasite.
Yeah. It really nails that feeling of being hooked, tethered to this thing that's constantly demanding your attention, pulling you away from the present, that urge to just disconnect from the noise.
We all feel that sometimes. This critique of tech carried on, didn't it, into productivity tools?
It did. The point was we have all these amazing tools meant to make us more efficient.
Laptops, software, instant communication.
Right. And yet, the standard 40-hour work week hasn't really budged for most people, which kind of suggests maybe we're not using the tools right, or the structure itself is inefficient.
Or maybe the work just expands to fill the time.
Could be. They also hammered home how addictive a lot of tech is by design.
Engineered for engagement.
Exactly. Don't make me think. Keep scrolling, keep clicking, often prioritizing engagement over actual well-being.
And the impact on kids.
Yeah.
They raise some serious concerns there.
Yeah, growing up constantly plugged in. One point was about maybe not hearing the word no enough because devices just give you what you want instantly.
Interesting. And the analog clock thing.
Right. Basic skills like reading a traditional clock potentially getting lost. It suggests a real shift in how kids interact with the physical world, maybe losing some fundamental skills.
Which makes preparing them for the future job market incredibly tricky.
Yeah.
What did the speakers suggest focusing on?
They lean towards foundational things, like math, quantitative skills, things that are less likely to become obsolete overnight compared to specific software or tech platforms.
Build a strong base.
That was the idea. They contrasted the fleeting nature of a lot of tech with the permanence of things like mathematics and, interestingly, Bitcoin again.
Why Bitcoin again?
Because of its underlying mathematical principles, its verifiable nature. Like numbers themselves, it represents a kind of universal truth, unlike, say, the next trendy app.
Which brought them to the Millennium Prize problems.
Yeah, this was a fascinating tangent. These 7 huge unsolved math problems.
With $1 million offered for solving each one.
Right. And they mentioned Grigory Perelman, the Russian mathematician who solved one, and then turned down the prize money. The speakers suggested that tackling these problems, maybe with AI's help eventually, could be the next giant leap for humanity, like fundamentally game-changing stuff.
And they link this back to Bitcoiners.
Intriguingly, yes. They theorize that people deep in the Bitcoin world, dealing with cryptography, prime numbers, elliptic curves daily.
The core math behind it.
Exactly. Those people might actually be uniquely positioned to contribute to solving some of these massive mathematical challenges.
It's a wild thought that the skills honed in crypto could unlock fundamental math breakthroughs. What about the impact of solving them? Encryption came up, right?
Yes. Big time. Because a lot of modern encryption relies on the difficulty of certain mathematical problems, like factoring large numbers. If those problems get solved,
then current encryption methods could break.
Potentially, yes. Which sounds scary. But then they made another interesting point about Bitcoin's potential resilience.
How so? Even if encryption breaks?
Yeah. The idea was that because Bitcoin's ledger is distributed everywhere, and your main public key isn't revealed until you actually spend from an address, well, it might have inherent defenses that other systems lack, even in that kind of future. It's complex, but thought-provoking.
Definitely something to chew on. Okay, shifting gears again. The future of movies and entertainment.
Yeah, they talked about AI potentially disrupting Hollywood in a big way.
How?
Imagine being able to easily create your own films, maybe starring yourself or an avatar of yourself, personalized movie generation.
Wow. Like filmmaking for everyone.
Kind of like what happened with podcasting, maybe. Lowering the barrier to entry, leading to an explosion of individual creators. They did give a nod to Christopher Nolan, though.
As someone still focused on the craft.
Exactly. Someone prioritizing practical effects, the art of filmmaking, in a world leaning towards digital ease.
And they used Nolan to make an analogy, right? About proof of work versus proof of stake.
Yeah, that was clever. They basically said, Nolan's films, lots of practical effects, tangible effort, hard work are like proof of work.
Real resources expended.
Right. Whereas maybe a Michael Bay film, heavy on CGI, lots of stuff outsourced, is more like proof of stake.
Where holding the stake, the asset, gives you influence rather than the ongoing work itself.
That was the analogy, yeah. A simplified way to grasp the difference in how these crypto consensus mechanisms function. And speaking of Nolan, they briefly touched on Tenet.
Ah, the time-bending movie.
Yeah, acknowledging it was maybe a bit too complex, hard to follow.
Compared to Inception, maybe?
Exactly. They found the dream layers in Inception easier to grasp than Tenet's inverted time flows.
Fair enough. Did this lead back to time travel ideas?
It did, more theoretically, linking the possibility of real-time manipulation to solving those Millennium problems again.
No.
The idea was that if you truly understood time at a fundamental level, maybe as discrete moments like frames in a film, you could potentially reconstruct past moments or even manipulate the sequence. It gets very sci-fi.
Definitely. They talked about reality being like pixels.
Yeah, like everything. Us, the environment, being made of fundamental particles, interactions of electrons. And our senses just interpret these fields.
So if you could control those fields.
Theoretically, you could create simulations indistinguishable from reality.
Yeah.
Or maybe even manipulate time. It's deep speculation, obviously.
How would you even prove time travel? Plus, the questions about identity. More assigned than declared. Lots to think about.
It really is, which brought them to a really powerful point about responsibility.
Responsibility to the future. Because of Bitcoin.
Exactly. With Bitcoin's immutable ledger, the idea is that the future is, in a way, watching us right now. Our actions, our decisions, recorded permanently.
Like how we look back at historical documents or recordings. But it's happening live, being recorded now.
Precisely. Bitcoin as this travelator through time, carrying a permanent record. They contrasted this with things designed to manipulate us, like casino layouts.
No clocks, confusing carpets.
Right. Designed to keep you there, spending money. The argument is that a transparent, immutable system like Bitcoin might encourage better, more long-term thinking.
That's optimistic. They also mentioned positivity.
Yeah, as a valuable resource, especially when money is losing value, positivity is free and it compounds. And a need for more global cooperation, less conflict.
And that line about history now being written by Bitcoin, not just the victors.
Powerful, isn't it? The immutable ledger tells its own story. It creates this feeling, they said, of living in two worlds at once.
So,
one world is this exciting frontier of Bitcoin innovation and potential. The other is the kind of doom loop of existing societal problems, politics, negativity.
Parallel realities.
Sort of. They acknowledge governments are needed for scale, but they have to be organized well without corruption. And ultimately, they positioned Bitcoin as an inheritance.
Something we're building and leaving for the future.
Yes. And circling back to those math problems.
The Millennium problems again.
Yeah. They just kept emphasizing how crucial solving those is for real human progress. Because mathematical truths, once discovered, are universal.
They don't need marketing or distribution like a product.
Exactly. They contrasted manufactured success, like wealth, fancy cars, with the lasting impact of contributing to knowledge, to that forever category.
Real legacy versus temporary status.
Right. And again, they touched on how math breakthroughs might affect encryption, but how Bitcoin's architecture might still prove surprisingly robust.
Okay. And then just some final thoughts on society.
Yeah, wrapping up. Mentioning how media often seems to thrive on conflict, maybe because it drives clicks and engagement, rather than focusing on positive stuff.
The if it bleeds, it leads idea.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And observing that maybe people are just getting tired of the constant political fighting, becoming apathetic.
Understandable. Did they suggest any solutions?
Some interesting, maybe radical ideas came up, like what if we had annual elections, or referendums on major budget decisions, tax changes.
Putting more power directly to the people on big financial calls.
That was the drift. Highlighting huge spending decisions, often made with little direct public input. It all fed into this general feeling of frustration and the need for a change in focus.
Okay, so quite a journey we've taken, mirroring the source material.
Definitely covered a lot.
So, wrapping up this deep dive for you, our listener, we've gone from the pressures of the current system, the housing costs, the political frustrations,
to the potential role of Bitcoin as maybe a source of truth, a hedge, and this immutable record for the future.
Right. Then the importance of critical thinking, finding purpose beyond just money, the changing value of time.
Becoming a time billionaire.
Exactly. And the impact of tech, both good and bad. And finally, those huge fundamental mathematical challenges waiting to be solved.
Our goal here was really just to distill all that down for you, give you the key takeaways from the discussion you shared, those aha moments, without you having to sit through the whole original thing, perhaps.
Hopefully, we've hit that sweet spot. And here's that final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. If technology like Bitcoin is creating this permanent, unchangeable record of our present, if the future's watching, in a sense. How does that change our sense of responsibility right now?
Does it change how we act, what we value, what we choose to record on that digital ledger? What kind of legacy are we building moment by moment?
Something to think about. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, the implications of this tech, and what it all means for the future we're creating today.